Okay, let's do it like this. Yeah, so my name is Rico Lie and I work with a research group at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and the group is called Knowledge, Technology and Innovation. And within those 3 words, I will also give a presentation. And the presentation is entitled Communicating, Learning, Changing and Development. And I hope this in this session, the papers will also speak to each other, as Vaya was saying. So to the title, Mediating Change, I kind of decided to have a focus on learning, and learning, especially in the field of communication for development. So, yeah, ICT for D. So I will also be connecting it to information and communication technology for development. And I didn't know exactly what the audience would be, so I thought it might be wise to start with a general definition of what ICT for D actually is. So ICT for D is applying information and communication technologies for social, economic, and political development. But the final part of that sentence is interesting because it says, with a particular emphasis on helping poor and marginalized people and communities. Okay, so let me share what our perspective then is on this field of communication for development. As I said, I work in a research group called Knowledge, Technology and Innovation. And our perspective is actually that we start with a focus on change and development. And that technology is actually only a tool to get there. So if we put the concepts in order, then development is first, change is first, and then we look at communication. So what role can communication actually play in development? And then finally, we look at technology, and sometimes we actually get rid of all the technology and do it without any information and communication technology. So somewhere within that whole field, there is also the issue of learning. And that's why for this presentation, I wanted to focus on that. And I will have a theoretical part, which I will start, and then zoom in to a research project that we are working on, or have been working on for the past 4 years. And within that larger research project, I will tell something about potato diseases in Ethiopia and the management of those diseases. Okay, let me briefly tell you something about the background of the theory. This is something, a project we started in 2015 together with Jan Servaas in Hong Kong. And we kind of did a review of the whole field of communication for development and social change. And we try to map the field. What disciplines are there? What sub-disciplines? What are the key concepts? What are the practices? Where are people actually doing research, etc.? And we ended with some future imperatives. And these were the future imperatives. So the concluding 5 bullet points of all that work. Addressing sustainability. The building of resilient communities, recognizing that development problems are complex, working in a transdisciplinary way, and giving further attention to creative techniques and methodologies. But the final one is the one I want to continue on, and that's connecting communication to learning. We found that learning, education, and the exchange of knowledge is quite important in this whole field. So we continue on that and try to do, in this case, together with Loes, we try to map what kind of learning theories are out there and how can these learning theories be connected to ICTs, to to communication technologies. So we reviewed 4 different fields within the domain of learning studies: social learning, experiential learning, collaborative learning, transformative learning, and some other forms, visual learning, intercultural learning, and distance learning, and try to connect that to ICTs. Also here, 3 different conclusions came out. The first conclusion is quite fundamental, and that is that learning itself is actually changed, and learning is developing. It's not only that learning leads to developing, but the whole process, the learning process and the learning outcomes is changing itself. And communication is a learning process, so they are intrinsically connected. And the 2 other points that came out is, first of all, the added value of the group. So we found that the quality of learning is actually increasing if you connect people, if people are doing it somehow together, right? So collaborative learning is already an example of that, but social learning also relates to relations that people have. And then the third conclusion was on the centrality of experience and reflexivity. So those 2 processes also played a quite important role in learning processes. Okay, that was the theoretical background of our work. Let me now tell you something about a project we have been working on for the past 4 to 5 years, which is called Environmental Virtual Observatories for Connective Action, Voca. And within this project we had 11 PhD working on one similar issue. And let me tell you what that issue is, what the core idea is of Voca. So this is the central research question. So how can life science knowledge, digital technologies, and responsible innovation, how can they build inclusive virtual platforms for environmental information that enable collective action? So these are actually the 4 core concepts within Voca. So Voca is very much about citizen science. So it's about what it says, ordinary people. With ordinary people, we mean non-scientists, so non-researchers, how they collect data and somehow upload those data to an online platform, what we call environmental virtual observatories. And within this platform, so the data are there on this platform, then they get somehow converted and transformed to be relevant for other people, maybe for themselves also. So, and that would lead to some kind of collective action, right? And all that in the context of a responsible innovation. And responsible innovation means taking care of the future through collective stewardship of science and innovation in the present. So it means what we do now has an impact in the future, and we should realize that. Okay, so we had actually 6 different cases working in this context in different countries in Africa, addressing different complex problems. So we had a case on diseases in bananas. We had a case on extension services in Ghana. We had a case on ticks in Kenya, on malaria in Rwanda, another water case in Ghana, and one potato case in Ethiopia. And they all were looking in collecting data related to malaria, for instance, and collecting those data at a central place and trying to rework these data to be useful for interventions. Okay, but I will focus on this case. on a potato case in Ethiopia, and the management of two potato diseases, bacterial wilt and late blight. And we had two Ethiopian PhD students working on it, Shivara and Elias, and they just finished defending their work. So they're doctors now, so that's great. But let me tell you about their research, right? So it's about the management of these two diseases, and these two potato diseases are causing quite a lot of problems in Ethiopia at the moment, because they're spreading rapidly, and it's not an individual problem of farmers, right? Because these late blight, for instance, is airborne. So if you have 5 farmers living next to each other, and one farmer has the disease, then the other farmers will also get it. So it's a collective problem, right? And also the management should be done in a collective way. So we try to see how that could be implemented, and maybe using information and communication technologies for that. But as I told you, of course, we started with the development issue and the change issue, and not with the technology. I will skip this. This is about doing it in an interdisciplinary way. Yeah? So we had one PhD focusing more on the social sciences, and the other one more on the technical sciences, and they were doing a kind of duo PhD. So they worked a lot together. But the first 2 papers that came out of their work were actually 2 papers that tried to make an inventory of what was already there, right? So the first paper had a systems perspective and tried to look into the whole potato production system in Ethiopia. And the idea behind it was this idea of systems thinking. So how do the people understand where their place is in the system, right? How aware are the people of other people who also work in the same system? That was the first question, and the first paper was describing the system as such. And the second paper was also making an inventory on what the existing knowledges were with the farmers, and what the existing practices, these disease management practices, were with the farmers. So 2 papers, here are the references, and 3 key findings came actually out of this research. So the first finding was that the actors essentially overlooked key systemic problems. So the farmers didn't realize that they were part of a system. The view was quite individual and quite event-oriented also. And the second key finding here is that there's limited recognition of interdependencies. So again, the farmers didn't realize that they were together responsible for the spread of the disease, and could also together manage the disease. So the second key finding was actually that there should be a focus on interactive information sharing and learning, right? So there was a lack of knowledge and a lack of being aware of things, right? So learning interventions would make sense. And there was very limited knowledge of both diseases, actually. Okay, so what we did after we did those 2 diagnostic studies was that, well, we need to focus more on learning. Farmers need to learn about the diseases and how to manage them in the local context with a feasible combination of management options through a community-based approach. So here the collective part also came in, right? And maybe it could work with operational standards in some kind of bylaws. So we said, let's focus on learning for the remaining parts of the PhD. And again, two papers came out of this focus on learning in their projects. The first paper was called Governing a Collective Bed, Social Learning in the Management of Crop Diseases. And the second paper looked at combining experiential learning and social learning and see how that would work out. So let me tell you briefly about the results of these two papers. So the first paper, these were the questions for the first research paper. So the main question was, how does social learning as a communicative process influence collective action? So we should go to this connective and collective action. How could a learning intervention lead to that? This was a conceptual framework that we used for that. So here's the learning process, and learning is seen as communication. So communication about technical knowledge, communication about relations, and communication about actions. And this learning process leads to learning outcomes. And in this case, those learning outcomes were collective agreements, right? So what can we actually collectively do in order to manage these two diseases, and how do these agreements then can lead to collective action? Okay, the study showed how social learning through aligned knowledge, relations, and actions in communications formed the basis for collective agreement. So that the relationship was established, and we could get some more information about how social learning actually leads to farmers making agreements about how to manage the diseases. But the second step was very difficult to get a grip on, right? So there was limited, we were limited in being able to explain the translation from learning to action. So this part on collective agreements, how does that actually lead to collective action? That is something that needs some more work, some more research. And then the other paper, how does a learning intervention with a combination of experiential and social learning leads to change? So it was very much focusing this paper on the combination of experiential and social learning. So this was the conceptual framework for this paper. This is the experiential learning, and as I told you in the beginning, experiences and reflexivity play a very important role in learning processes. And this is the social learning part, so the collective learning part also is integrated in that. And how does that lead to effective management of these diseases, and in this case, bacterial wilt? So these were the key findings from the second paper. Farmers recognized their interdependency, role, and responsibility. So after a learning intervention in this way, farmers started to see a bit more where their place was within the system and how they relate to others. And the second one, we conclude that learning interventions aiming to improve smallholder farmers' knowledge, perceptions, and practices to deal with complex crop diseases need to combine experiential and social learning approaches and consider farmers' local knowledge. Okay, so I think that's what I wanted to tell about their research, actually. We were only the supervisors of this research. Elias and Shiva, thank you very much.